The Way of Will John.
Obviously, you said the U.S. is a democracy, and every once in a while, I'll see the headlines that'll push and say, "Well, we're a democracy, but we're kind of a republic, because of X, Y, and Z," or we're kind of, I don't want to call it a monarchy in a certain sense because we don't really have a king, but we've kind of knighted or donned these people to be the ones to decide, even though technically we didn't really decide. And so the seat of power in the U.S., which is really interesting, isn't always and necessarily, like we said, we have billionaires sponsoring certain politicians or bankrolling their entire thing, and it's like, who's in control here? Can you do something that is against the guy who gave you the money to get into the seat, or are you compromised in a certain sense? And so I'm curious what you actually think about those people that are outside, that are going to evade your scrutiny of an authoritarian regime. What do you think of them? Because they exist, right? And you said you're not, a clinical psychologist, for instance, and you don't use psychopath or something like this. But those people exist in the shadows, and they wield some sort of power.
Yeah.
And they probably have similar goals and similar ideas for control. What do you make of their relationship and role within our society?
Yeah. I think the whole Trump era has been a huge wake-up call to many Americans and people who love America from abroad. Because the whole thing, like, it can't happen here. It can't happen here because America is too much of a democracy. Everybody comes here to seek freedom from other countries, all this. And I see America from the lens of almost like a global history. And for me, for example, America was not a democracy until everybody could vote. So our democracy of course it was a democracy. The democratic institutions were established hundreds of years ago, but it was a very limited thing. But until civil rights legislation passed in the 1960s, it was not a democracy. And so it's very new, actually. We're a multiracial democracy. This is our winning point. And yet that's a very new experiment from the 60s. That's relatively recent, which is why it's been so fragile and there's so much backlash. However, that said, this issue of the kind of billionaires, we could call them oligarchs, and the dark money, and also the way that I think that this whole era now too, now Trump is gone, but the GOP in all these states has been souping up its attempts to make these state autocracies, right? And so there's a colleague of mine, I've had him on my web show for my newsletter, David Pepper. He was the former chair of the Ohio Democratic Party. He wrote a book called Laboratories of Autocracy. And it really opened my eyes, because again, I'm not a historian of America. I didn't know how bad things were. And he said, there are states, and Ohio is one of them, you cannot call it a functioning democracy because people's votes don't count because of gerrymandering, redistricting, all these tricks. And so between the amount of dark money and the gun lobby, for example, and you can have different opinions on your right to own a handgun or whatever to protect your property. But I'm talking about money flows. The fact that a lot of GOP politicians, they are essentially fully bankrolled by the gun lobby. In other countries, we would call these people arms dealers. So I'm also trying to find always the correct language, which is often taken from other countries, to capture the unique things about the United States. And again, whatever you feel about your right to have a handgun or something, this is a structural issue, as is the dark money and the billionaires. And they're connected because these people support, let's put it this way, they don't mind that there's a higher toll of mass gun violence than elsewhere because they have, I think, I wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post saying that gun violence as an outcome, the trauma as an outcome, can prime us for authoritarianism, because it makes you view schools are places of fear and suspicion, all of the places where people would be mixing different races, different cultures. There's a whole line of that. So these are things that are quite unique about America. The gun issue, the fact that people think it can't happen here, and the degree to which billionaires are not taxed. Other countries have higher tax rates for billionaires. So we have some structural problems that are not helping us in this moment. That's my long answer to it kind of qualifies the idea that we're just like this great democracy.
See you later.